The bad news is that King Charles is more stupid than even he predicted, and he just can't keep a promise. And the result, just 3 weeks after being made Britain's new king, he's had to be slapped down by the British government because, like so many other global warming extremists, he just can't stop lecturing people. A lot of Americans in particular, they don't get something about the British royalty. They reckon a king rules, just like in the children's books. You know, they make decisions, they snap their fingers and people do their bidding. That's exactly wrong. The King of Britain and of countries like Australia and Canada should actually stay the hell out of politics because they, big surprise, they weren't elected. They're just there as the ultimate umpire, the ultimate unifying figure in a crisis. The less they say, the better. And King Charles knows this. He actually knows he should shut up. In fact, 4 years ago, when he was still Prince, Charles was asked if he'd keep crusading on global warming as king. You know, like he'd done for decades as Prince, cheering on global warming hysteric Greta Thunberg, driving to the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony in a car that runs on wine and cheese and not that nasty petrol, telling world leaders to turn up to the last big UN conference on global warming because, you know, otherwise death and disaster.
I mean, what would you say to world leaders about why they should come to Glasgow?
Well, that's what I'm trying to say all the time. And the point being that this is a last chance saloon.
So, would Charles keep up this scaremongering and this activism and this political interference once he became king? It was asked exactly that question. No, he said, I'm not that stupid. Not that stupid at all.
But the idea somehow that I'm going to go on exactly the same way, if I have to succeed, is complete nonsense because the two situations are completely different. Clearly, I won't be able to do the same things I've done, you know, as heir. So, of course, you operate within the constitutional parameters.
But it turns out, to borrow the King's own words, he is that stupid. Because on Sunday, after just 3 weeks as king, the Times reported that Charles had planned to give a speech to the United Nations COP27 climate change conference in Egypt next month, until he had to be warned off by the new Prime Minister Liz Truss, who told him he couldn't go and play politics. She forced him to back down, but not before he had a spokesman whinge in public for him, to complain that he was forced to do that he'd changed his plans entirely in the spirit of being ever mindful as king that he acts on government advice. Advice, of course, being polite speech in the Westminster system for being given an order. Now, that is, in fact, the truth about the powers of the king, at least in the British system, in the Australian, Canadian, New Zealand system. You stay in your lane. You move outside it, and the Prime Minister will kick you back in. If that doesn't work, well, how does a republic sound to you, sire? And the sad thing is, and the worry for those of us who think, well, look, this British royalty stuff has worked pretty well, in fact, brilliantly over the many, many centuries, so far at least, and surely we could trust King Charles to keep it going. The sad thing is, why did this king even need to be told not to go and posture at a climate change conference? How did he not figure that simply showing up in Egypt would send a political message, and one that would drive the British government crazy? Has he not read the newspapers? Around the Western world, there is an energy crisis now, and it's not just caused by the war in Ukraine. It's also caused by politicians who went so crazy with this global warming cult that the king is so clearly a part of, that they closed coal-fired generators. They banned fracking for gas. They made coal and gas exploration too hard. Joe Biden's done the same suicidal stuff in the United States, by the way, closing fields to oil and gas exploration, and big surprise, result, many countries started to run out of cheap and reliable electricity. Britain especially. And this new government of Liz Truss is desperately winding back global warming policies so that Britain at least has enough energy next winter so the poor don't die of cold. That is why Liz Truss arced up at the King's plan to go to Cairo and tell the world to go in harder when she's trying to wind back this insanity that's made electricity and gas so expensive that many of the poor can't afford to heat their homes in winter. You couldn't get anything more political than what the King had planned. There was this King planning to blunder around. Again, how could he have been so stupid as to think he could get away with this? Because he knows he shouldn't even try. He knows this. In his first speech as King, it seemed that Charles had indeed got the message that he should follow his mother's example, Queen Elizabeth. In fact, he promised to change.
My life will, of course, change as I take up my new responsibilities. It will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies to the charities and issues for which I care so deeply.
Yet the King caved to the very first temptation. He couldn't resist giving another lecture on the doom he imagines we face from a global warming that's in fact given the world bigger crops and fewer hurricanes, despite what the left is claiming now with Hurricane Ian in Florida. Bigger crops, fewer cyclones and hurricanes. I mean, seriously, what is the problem here? Well, the real problem is people like the King, misusing their positions to lecture us on their climate cult, and then forgetting what their real job demands.